cold dark night in very late January. And gathered we were in the grand old city of York. Jared, turn it up for God's sake. Friends, we come here tonight to talk of things that go bump in the night and scratch and claw and talk in hushed voices from the shadows. Such a ridiculous obsession we share with the macabre. A compulsion to put our hands in places, the signs telling us not to put our hands in there. And let's look at you, madam, always reaching out with your foolish hand, even though the sign told you clearly not to do it. Look me in the eyes. The same part of the brain that makes you lick the 9-volt battery. Slowly your tongue creeps out from beneath your thirsted lips. Almost hungry, starved for the tiny tang of the shock of the battery. You know you shouldn't, and yet you know you must, you must, you must. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with every one of us? In a world of beauty, of great British bake-off and pottery throwdown. We turn away from the light, almost hungry for the shadows of the dark. The all-consuming, eyeball-popping, face-melting horror of it all!
Tonight's performance may contain scenes of absolute horror, the likes of which you may or may not have encountered over your life. The Deathly Dark players and Neon Crypt Entertainment are in no way liable for any actual faces melted off during the show, and operate a strict no-refund policy for anyone who's brought someone along tonight in the hope they meet an untimely demise.
Don't go down the stairs. Stay out of the basement. Stick with your friends. Never ever say, I'll be right back. You won't be back. And if you hear a final sound, the scream coming from a human throat, double lock the doors, put the cricket back down, put the kettle on, and close your eyes. Ignore the part of the brain that needs to take a peek. Keep your eye away from the keyhole. No one needs an ice pick deep in the brain, for there's not enough paracetamol in the world to cure the pain of cold steel in the frontal lobe. Although I suppose you can't complain about headaches when you're properly right dead. But if you feel you must, and that beckoning hand is too tempting to ignore, and you'll feel yourself walking out into the shadows, into the night, into the dark, darker and deeper, further and faster with your heart in your neck, at least know that you are likely not alone. For centuries, you see, for as long as time was even a concept, we've wandered slack-jawed, bogle-eyed, into that heavy-breathing black weave, pushed the button, yanked the lever, slapped the tiger and kicked the bear. And what does it get us, friends? It gets us nothing but dead. And dead is dead, as red is red. It's the sweet, calm nothing of the infinite void. But what if death is not the end, and there is more on the other side? So come with us now on a spooky adventure through time, but not space, because it's cold out there, and there be ghosts all around. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a night of face-melting horror! Horror, horror. Insert rapturous applause now.
Good evening, friends. Good evening. How are you? You, in particular. Pretty good. I'm asking him, calm down. My name, if you do not know, is Dr. Dorian Deathly, and I am obsessed with the supernatural, with the paranormal, with the things that go bump in the night. And I will be guiding you today through some... Do you know what? Before we get there, I think it's time to introduce my co-star for the evening. I will not be alone upon this weathered stage. Friends, I would like you to take your hands, slap them together, pull them apart, slap them together, pull them apart, slap them together, pull them apart, slap them together, and make a cacophony of violence and noise. And please, let's see if we can beckon out onto the stage my partner in life and indeed death. It's Mrs. Dee Dee Deathly. You came out the wrong X. I thought you were...
You taped me up.
Sorry. Too efficient.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Is that the elegant and majestic opening you told me you've been working on for 3 months? I liked it. It was elegant, concise.
Short.
You can maybe tell them a little bit about yourself, just for the, context.
I'm Dee Dee Deathly. I enjoy cats, ghosts, and eyeliner.
Right, let's crack on with the show. Friends, tonight we will be exploring the supernatural, the things that go bump in the night. All the way from the inception of the ghost story, from those withered years that we sat terrified, huddled in the dark, in the moist of our terrible little caves, gathered round the small burning campfire, frightened of those things that lurked out there in the shadows, all the way through the evolution and the spook-explosion of the Victorian times to a rather famous modern-day haunting that was guaranteed to scare the undercrackers right off of you. But before we begin, I think it's time we ask them a very important question.
Indeed.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the end of your arms, you'll find hands.
Oh my God! Oh, look at that. Was this there all along? Weird. What I want you to do, friends, is take those hands and put them up in the sky. Very good, very good, very good. Now, what I want you to do is leave that hand that's up in the sky up if you believe in ghosts. Good, good. Well, that's a slow withdrawal there, like you were like, I'm not sure, I'm not really certain.
Now, let's chop them down a bit. Leave your hand up if you think you've ever seen something that couldn't be explained, something proper spooky, and it made your blood run cold.
Hang on a minute, you put your hand back up. We're 10 minutes into the show and someone is suffering inner turmoil, asking so many questions of myself right now. And finally, leave that hand up if you have seen without a shadow of a doubt, seen, met, hung out, kicked it back real with a ghost. Double hand. Look at that. Hand kind of awkwardly placed at a 90-degree angle with a little wiggle there, just for a... I'm not sure. No, just feeling a bit theatrical. Good. Good. Interesting. Interesting. Now, we might ask a few more questions as the night rolls on, so keep those hands where you can find them, but for now, tuck them safely away. Now, a question that we are asked on an almost weekly basis is a question that we will ask you now, and then we'll almost immediately answer it for you. And that question is 3, 2, 1. What is a ghost? Thank you for coming. Good night. No, there's more. So this is a bit of a tricky one, but it is one we need to acknowledge. Webster's Dictionary, that infinite well of knowledge, says that a ghost is a disembodied soul, especially the soul of a dead person believed to be an inhabitant of the unseen world.
Wikipedia tells us that a ghost is the spirit of a dead person or animal that can appear to the living.
Apparition, phantom, spook, echo, shade, poltergeist, resonance, doppelganger. There's thousands of words to encompass the supernatural, but the one word that we always come back to, because it's really short and easy to say, is ghost. Over the years, we've become obsessed with these sheet-stealing entities. And here in York, we enjoy almost daily a wonderful breath of life into the ghost story. Massive industry for ghosts here in our magnificent city. It's claimed to be the most haunted city in all of England. England. I'm going to stop doing that. It's getting really old. We have, of course, the Ghost Merchants, very popular shop in the Shambles. We have like a dozen ghost tours.
Some of them multi-award winning.
And right now we sit here talking about things that we may not truly understand. Netflix has become a modern-day home for anthologies. The Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Club, to name a few. Back in the 1900s, of course, ghost stories really evolved. But more recently, last year, there was a film dominating the box office, absolutely rinsing it, thrashing all other films released. And that film was the ghostly story Smile. Anyone see it? Smile. Yeah, I hated it. I mean, I loved it, but I hated it. I cried. It was really upsetting.
Yeah, that's true.
Frightening stuff.
So, it was only beaten by one other film at the box office at the time. The most spine-chilling, horrific story ever told. Minions 2, The Rise of Gru.
Oh, Christ. Oh, look at those teeth.
Disgusting. Going back, we had theatre shows such as The Woman in Black, which was first staged in December 1987 at the Stephen Joseph Theatre in Scarborough. And not York, as I said yesterday. Unfortunate. And then it headed to the West End, where it became one of the longest running shows in history with a whopping 15,000 performances, and it's still going today.
Sadly closes in March. Yeah, after all that time. Someone says if ghost stories down south. They're not quite as enamoured with them as they once were. Ghost Stories, the play written by Jeremy Dyson and Andrew Nyman, ran for 1,000 performances before being turned into a film in 2017 with the Hobbit-touching lunatic Martin Freeman. Freddy Krueger was a ghost that haunted the dreams of horny teenagers. Poltergeist, $120 million made on like a $5 to $10 million budget. Ooh.
Over the Victorian times, people were eating up the writings of Bram Stoker, Charles Dickens, Amelia B. Edwards, Rudyard Kipling.
Oh, Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book. Proper frightening stuff. All them bears.
I was thinking more the Phantom Rickshaw.
That's also quite frightening, yeah.
Yes.
That's also quite frightening.
Now, Charles Dickens was known to be a lively actor who would deliver performances of his stories to captivated and terrified audiences.
No, I know what you're thinking. A Christmas Carol? Like, that's not frightening. That is the fault of a certain green frog and his mates. We'll talk more about that later on. The original text of A Christmas Carol is proper shit-your-pants scary stuff.
Fact. But for now, we're going to go right back to the very start of it all, to what is believed to be the very first ghost story.
Boop. Oh. Ooh. Shit. Frightening stuff, that. 3,500 years ago, maybe it's more frightening with context, a very skilled artist carves into a block of clay the image that we're looking at now, bar the printed numbers. There's some kind of like library identification. He didn't have like a typewriter back in the Anyway, in the more recent times, London's Middle Eastern department, a curator, he discovers this image, really pulls it apart, analyzes it, and he declares that he believes it is the first ever depiction of an actual ghost.
And that guy, absolute legend, Irving Finkel. Dr. Irving Finkel, best name ever. I met him last year at the Yorkshire Museum and he signed a copy of his book for me.
The first ghost. Yeah. You could kill a man with that book.
You could.
And I will now.
May have done. And this is him, right here, showing you his pots.
That is exactly what a man called Irving Finkel should look like. Look at him. Would you like to come into my little room? Look at my pots. I've got a spare corduroy jacket you can have if you like. There's a question that's often said in response to... sorry, I'll shout it again. There's an answer that's often said in a question that is asked of Irving Finkel. And that question is, Dr. Finkel, have you ever seen a ghost? To which he will reply, I have never seen a ghost. I would really, really like to. It's quite saddening to me that I have not. Which is genuinely one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever heard. Yeah. Come and look at my pots. Are you here to enroll in the Discworld University? Wonderful. Fellow nerds in the audience. Good, good.
So we're not going to talk about the Babylonian tablet for too long, or Bab-Tab, as I like to call it. What's very interesting about this is that it tells us how to get rid of a ghost.
Step 1, make figurines of a man and a woman.
Step 2, prepare 2 vessels of beer.
Step 3, at sunrise, speak the Mesopotamian words, preaching aloud to the god Shamash, or Shemesh. It was his job to guide the dead into the underworld. So chances are, if they were all just running around the place willy-nilly, Shamash would be really annoyed about the situation.
So the idea is that Shamash would transfer the ghost into one of the figurines. Now, this is a really creepy thing. It also says in the ritual, you must not look behind you. Right.
Don't look behind you. You should probably look behind you. He's getting closer. He's really leaning in for a sniff. It's happening. And now his partner's like, don't do it. You don't know that woman, you'll be arrested. The Mesopotamians had people schooled in magic, experts in appeasing ghosts and sending them back to where they came from.
Like Ghostbusters.
Yeah, exactly like the Ghostbusters. Brilliant. It's time for... What button did you press then? You're right up there. Yeah. Told you a bottle of wine before the show was a bad idea. Fine for us. You're near the electricity. Unbelievable. We're going to take a little break from history now, but don't panic. If you've enjoyed a bit of a stealthy education on a Saturday night, we'll go back into it. But for now, we're going to break up the evening with a number of ghosts caught on film. Now, there are a few unwritten rules about ghost or spirit photography in the modern day. Number one, they must be dark and poorly focused. Number two, they must be as low definition as pixelated as humanly possible. And number three, for bonus added value, if it was taken using a potato, good for you. Well done. All the better. All the better.
You absolutely don't see many ghosts caught on 4K. Why, pray tell, is that?
Just sat down, mate. Unbelievable. Well, there's this idea that... do we have any photographers in the house tonight? Show me a little wiggle of the hand. Yeah. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? 36. So, yeah, you probably remember the old days then. Do you remember when we used to, actually go and buy rolls of film and put them in cameras? And then you'd be limited to, 24, 36 shots, and you'd have to take it out, and you'd have to go and give it to the man behind the counter in boots, and then they'd be, looking through photos going, Then all of a sudden, technology shifted, and digital photography arrived. And we got a bit lazy, didn't we? Suddenly, we weren't restricted by 24, 26, 28, whatever. Suddenly, we had thousands. We could just be like... anything. Take photos of anything. And don't we? Oh, look at that cake. Oh, look at them sprouts. Oh, look at this weird growth. No, something to talk about. Online referral. Don't want to talk about it at the moment. It was almost as if by removing a roll of film, making it slightly lazier, the ghosts were like, if you're not going to put the effort in... we ain't even going to bother turning up anymore. It's not to say that ghost photos weren't captured over these years. In fact, we stop off at a site on our walking tour. Every night, myself or one of our wonderful tour guides will stop at number 5 College Street in York, and I urge them to take a photograph of this particular window. Now, over the years, we've been sent this image, or a version of it, to our social media, I would say close to 400 or 500 times. Easily. And over those times, there's only ever been one that made us stop, pause, and go, ah! And this is the one. It's an interesting one, this, isn't
right.
it?
Bring the lights up, Jared.
Thanks, Jared.
Hands up if you can see something creepy in that window. A Pop-Tart.
A plant pot.
Oh, that's a candle on the left.
Have you got a phobia of plant pots? Yeah? No, you should never go to the range because there's loads of them. You'll be like, oh, God, that little white thing there is a candle that they light around about October time to commemorate the tragic thing that happened there. I'm not going to give you the full story, but apparently a young girl was bricked up inside of that house during the Black Death in 1603 to 04, and as a sort of commemoration, there's something there. Now, this is a strange one because when it arrived on our devices about a year and a half ago, I was... post-tour, laying on the sofa, in some kind of tea and toast coma, just like... And when I looked at the image, there was a genuine pit in the stomach. And weirdly, now I look at it, I can't see anything. But you still can.
Well, I think originally you said you saw a face in the top right-hand pane of glass.
Top right.
Whereas
God! Oh, she's back!
Yeah.
Oh, God!
Whereas I see the middle pane
Sorry,
I see the
really
middle pane, a little boy that looks like Dennis the Menace, going like this.
That was genuinely so weird. Suddenly it just popped into... But then when you zoom into potato vision, it's just not there anymore.
No, I still see it.
You still see it. Interesting. Perception.
Anybody else Dennis the Menace?
Perception. It's all about perception. Yeah. I think genuinely some will see, some won't. We often talk on our podcast how I have a very cynical scientific approach to this sort of thing. I love the theatre, I love the stories, I love the performance. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. We're now going to move on to our first non-York ghost photo of the night. And here is the image right here. Tell me if you can spot anything strange. Lovely family photo.
There's conflicting information about the origin of this photograph. It's believed to date back to 1959. It was possibly taken in Texas. However, didn't appear online until 2009, and the story that goes along with it didn't turn up until 2012.
And we're told that the family were called Cooper. That's what people said, but it was actually corrected by one of the children. They came forward and said, actually, we were called the Copper family. The father of the family took that photo. It was the first night in the house. Now, he said when he framed it, he had the children, he had the sister and the mother, and he left this just because he wanted to get the candles in. This thing here wasn't there. Now, the boy said that the photograph existed for nearly 4 decades in an old shoebox in the Cooper family attic, and he genuinely says he has no idea how this image got online. That's probably the strangest thing about it. It went very huge and got a lot of traction on Reddit back when it was initially released, obviously because of that strange image there. He said originally the photograph, you remembered it well, whatever that is in the left wasn't there. Now, it's been looked at by photographers, experts in film development. It's been looked at for people that do Photoshop, etc. They say it's not been tampered with. It's not been edited in any way. As far as they're concerned, that is a scan of the original photograph. And the weird thing is that when they recovered the physical photograph from the shoebox, that's what it looked like. So it's almost as if whatever is there on the left just took a few decades to make itself known.
I'm only just tonight, after 5 nights, noticing that, firstly, it's wearing a knuckle duster.
Oh, it's probably going to batter that little kid in the head.
Also, you can see like little white eyes on it, like a shadow person. That's really creepy. I'm sure they weren't there yesterday.
Genuinely don't.
It's still changing.
Think they were. I'm just going to turn it off now. I don't want to look at it anymore. I feel a bit sick. Right. We're going to launch forward in history now, about 1,000 years or so. It's not to say there weren't any ghost sightings over this 1,000 years. It's just that primarily humans were concerned with one thing, not being dead. Not being dead in oldie days was quite a stressful experience. We didn't really write a lot of history down. The leading cause of death in England for about 1,000 and some years was a January to the face. Stories of demons, monsters, creatures lurking in the shadows are abundant. But this is also a time when people thought that the earth was a big round pancake spinning through the center of everything.
And most people were very big on the idea of spirits, good and evil, but pretty firm that once you're dead, and that's that. Demons could possess the living, but there would be no floating around in white sheets. Thank you very much.
If you ever find yourself on the shambles, keep an eye out for that one. He's always there. Now, the Greeks were as obsessed with ghosts as the Victorians would ultimately be, and they were super organized when it came to the ghosts. They would have several categories for the supernatural. They had one category called the Aoroi. They were believed to be the ghosts of people who had had very short, unfulfilled lives. A more modern term was birthed in the Victorian times, and that was slightly easier to pronounce, gaggle wretch. Gaggle wretches are said to be children who have been perhaps murdered or lost their lives at rather foul and despotic hands. Again, not to keep completely saying this phrase, we will talk about that before the night is through. The Biathanatoi, they were spirits believed to have died a sudden and violent death, often those sent off to war and battle.
One thing that was constant in Grecian history, the ghost stories were spectres that were almost dark, featureless shadow creatures. And they could only contact the living if they consumed their blood.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Mrs. Deathy took that photo last night as I was climbing into bed.
A bit much.
Yeah. Now, there was a story that emerged around this time. It was written by the wonderful writer called Valerius Maximus. He wrote a short story about a poet called Simonides. Now, one day, Simonides was out for a nice walk, just enjoying the rolling green hills, and suddenly, upon the ground, he found, a dead body. You know, as you did back in the olden days. And at this moment, he was faced with a few options. Number one, he could step over the body and move on with his day. Or number two, he could take the time, energy, and effort to bury the stranger's corpse. Thankfully, he did just that. He found a spade, he dug a hole, he pushed the body in, he covered it up, he made a little makeshift gravestone. A lot of effort. He was quite tired. He wandered back to his little villa, tucked himself away into his ramshackle bed, and fell asleep. A few hours later, he awoke in the night. There was a figure, a shape, standing at the end of the bed, looming over him. It was the apparition of the man he'd buried early that day, who was so grateful that Simonides had taken the time to bury him that he decided he should have a chance a slight longer at life. "You, my friend," he said, "are destined to take a voyage by boat later this week. Do not, for ill times will befall you." Ha! Suddenly he woke up with a start. The room was exactly empty and exactly as he expected to find it. But nevertheless, he listened to the ghost, did not get on the boat, and a week later he found out it had sunk, killing all hands on board. The last line of the story is genuinely beautiful. It says, "He was not a little glad he had trusted his life to the security of a dream rather than to the mercy of the sea." Got a bit emotional.
Well, it's proper nice, that, isn't it?
Beautiful words.
Almost relaxing. Now, something close to my heart is cats. Little tiny kitty cats. Cute little noses and ears and tails and you know. The Greek kept all... He disagrees. The Greek kept all kinds of animals as pets, including dogs, ducks, but for some reason, cats were left out of the family. It wasn't until Alexander the Great led the great campaign, humble guy, over to Egypt, and he saw how much they adored all things feline. They would be mummified with their cats. They'd shave their eyebrows off when a family pet died.
The people, not the cats. There weren't just loads of cats walking around Egypt going, "Jesus Christ."
Are you
I
finished?
look awful.
They'd even bury them with jewels and beaded collars, no less than they deserve. And for that reason, to this day, some people say that when they visit Egypt, they hear scratches coming from enclosed tombs. They see the little shadows of cats darting around in the darkness. Right.
No.
You seem to want to be heard tonight.
No.
So,
All right, sassy.
I think it's time that you tell the audience about this thing that's going on with you and a cat that may or may not live in our neighbourhood.
Nope. Not interested.
Tell the story. I think it'll be good for you.
I don't think it will. I think if I talk about it, it'll...
Lovely people, please give me a cheer if you'd like to hear the story about the cat.
I'm sweating already. It's just, all right, I'll do it. But only if I can do it in the form of slam poetry. Jared, music.
Hey, I've pulled the microphone up and Jared's pressed the button. This is happening. Friends, this is a story all about cats. About a terrible creature that lurks in the shadows. A monster that in my mind has been farted forth from the arsehole of hell. And they call him Steve. Steve! Slinking through the shadows, under the cars, from wheelie bin to bin, with death in his coal black eyes, it's Steve. He's got murder in his heart, claws like razors, teeth like knives. He cannot be stopped. Why? Because he has 9 lives. It's Steve. Everybody, it's Steve. like a whisper in the dark. There one moment, gone the next, a distant rancid meow that leaves your mind perplexed. It's Steve. Who the fuck calls a cat Steve? Why not something normal, like Tiddles or Admiral Meowington? Why Steve? Am I frightened of him because he's a monster? Or because he's a cat called Steve? Steve. What's his name? Steve. One more time, it's... 3 more times, it's Steve, Steve, Steve. I mean, come on, friends. That's a human name. It's a name that he, quite frankly, has no right to. It's an... Oh, jeez, what are you doing?
Steve.
Did someone give him that name? Or did he take it from someone? From a human man called Steve? And if so, how did he take it from him? And what happened to that man, to that human man called Steve? Did Steve kill human Steve and take his name as his own? And if that's the case, how did he do it? Did he chew through human Steve's brake cables with his little cat mouth? Or did he sneak into human Steve's house while he slept and slowly clambered up the soft warmth of the duvet and sat upon his face with his warm, furry body and suffocated him? Because I'm quite certain that Steve's in our house. Because last night I went to the toilet for a poo and he was here in the bottom of the stairs, man. He was just...
It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, God.
Come on. Dorian. Steve's not real.
Oh, God. He is real. He's genuinely real. Every time I'm really hot. Every time I get home, it's just this big, fat, black cat that's sat at the top of the road. And every time I go and get Mrs. Deathy to show him, he's there, he's at the top of the road. He ain't there anymore. I genuinely don't know where he is.
Oh, he's so cute. He's got into the projector again. All right, Steve.
He's got eyes like a shadow person.
Okay, I think it's time we move on and leave the cat stuff behind.
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks.
So, we're jumping smack into the Roman times. You may or may not know this, but York has an awesome Roman connection. In fact, many believe if it wasn't for a love triangle between a Brigantes queen, her husband's armourer, and a Roman governor who got fed up with these rowdy northerners running around and bonking each other, York might not have the history that it does.
Right, as a historian, I have to say that that's the most concise and academic explanation of the genesis of York I've ever heard. Everyone was shagging, et voila. Beautiful. Now we're going to stretch back to 71 AD when 5,000 soldiers of the Roman legion established the fortress Eburacum, right where we sit now. Why the history lesson? Well, it brings us to one of York's most famous ghost sightings. And in the middle of it, this man. This is Harry Martindale. And in February 1953, 18-year-old Harry Martindale was working on some pipes beneath the treasurer's house. Now, he says it began with a sound of a distant drum beat and trumpet. Before his eyes, a broad-shouldered man walked through the wall. He was followed by a horse and cart and 20 or so other looking sad and dejected soldiers. They all looked cold and disheveled, like they were walking a route they had walked 1,000 times before. Now, Martindale was horrified, not only by the apparition, but by the strange fact that all the men were cut off at around 15 or so inches. Their legs had disappeared into the ground. He fell off the ladder, he scampered back into the corner of the room, and he made himself as small as he possibly could.
He absolutely shat himself. and he took 2 weeks off work for stress. But the people that he worked with thought it was hilarious. They just laughed at him, and when he got back to work, he was so embarrassed he didn't want to talk about it. He just wanted to get on with his life. And it wasn't until the 70s, when he was in his 30s, that he finally agreed to talk to some academics about what happened, and the story really came to life.
So an actual Roman road was discovered about 15 inches beneath the cellar that Martindale had been working on, just at the exact height that the men were cut off at. And it became clear that the road would have led right into the middle of the Roman garrison. Harry was also able to describe perfectly elements of the armour and weaponry that they had, which were very specific to the 9th Legion that was stationed here at the time. It was almost as if the road had been walked so often in life, something had been left behind. Now, there's this brilliant old supernatural theory that I am a huge fan of called stone tape theory. Anyone heard of it? It's this idea that something like wood or stone, a porous material, if interacted with by the living, if walked, touched, fondled by those of this mortal plane more than enough times, that something can be left behind.
So logically, that means that many years from now, ghosty boys will be flying around in their white sheets attached to mobile phones.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of hauntings based in stone tape theory. The Grey Lady of the Theatre Royal, possibly one of the most famous ghost stories in the city. People say they often see a glowing orb of light moving up high in the gods, become distracted by scratching and scraping coming from the floorboards. The stage management crew, little headsets, often hear the sound of whispered voices, particularly 3 words singing, "Let me out." Robert Aske, poor fella, he was executed middle of the 1500s for treason, speaking out against King Henry VIII, and the punishment was to be hanged in chains, not from the neck but from the wrists and the armpits. It took him 7 days to die, after which they left the body hanging there for a year. People believed that something, resonance, had been left behind for years, hundreds of years. People believed the phantom of Robert Aske haunted that very tower.
It did turn out to be a window shutter that wasn't quite closed properly, and when it was a little bit windy, it made a sound like frightening stuff.
Yeah, more frightening is the fact it took us 450 years to figure that one out. We're not the sharpest here in the north of England, but we got like grass and lovely castles to look at, so we make up for it in other ways. Martindale, he never made a penny from the story, although his son said he got a lot of lovely dinners out of interviews and articles. And many people have asked the question, was he truthful or was he a big old faker? But one thing everybody who met him agreed is that he was a magnificent storyteller. Oh,
so Roman ghosts aren't just discovered in York. They're often spotted marching along the longest, and some people say most haunted stretch of road in England, the dreaded M6. Shit. Look at the state of that.
You'll
wet
never see it that
bastard.
empty. That's a
Whoa.
Photoshop.
Running for a little over 230 miles and nicknamed the backbone of Britain, people have seen glowing eyes staring out at them from the bushes. Women in white dresses standing on overpasses giving them the eye. And most famously, late at night when there's not many people around, people have claimed to see dozens of Roman soldiers marching along the opposite carriageway.
It's very good of them to obey UK traffic laws when you think about it. Now, internationally renowned psychic Mike Brooker, there he is, absolutely knocking the shit out of the local news article pose. He claims that he believes this particular stretch of land to be... He believes that there are Roman burial grounds beneath the tarmac. He says there have been an unusual number of accidents and incidents between junctions 16 to 19 of this particular stretch of motorway. And he says, and I have to quote this, "I personally believe that when supernatural things have attached themselves to this particular stretch of motorway and science has had to hold up its hands and is a complete loss to explain why these accidents keep happening, there is only one alternate explanation for what is happening."
And that explanation is that angry Roman ghosts are making cars crash into each other.
That's science.
Either way, fantastic story.
Yeah. Telling a good ghost story, like Harry Martindale or good old Mike Brooker there. It's all about atmosphere. You can have the words, they're all very important, there's no disagreeing with that, but with the right atmosphere, ghost stories can go beyond, they can become more elegant, refined. And I think that there is one theme that always rings true throughout a good ghost story. You're never going to hear many ghost stories begin with, "Hey, it was a lovely warm sunny day. The beach was hot and full of life." The most important element of ghost stories to me is light or the absence of.
I do not like it.
No, many don't. It's a real fear. Nyctophobia, it's called. It's the fear of dark or the night. People with really bad nyctophobia will struggle with shortness of breath, palpitations, nausea, dizziness, and they will feel themselves slowly slipping away into madness, disconnect horrifically from reality. Martin Anthony, a professor of psychology, states that fear is like pain. Fear is there to calm down, protect us from potential danger. Now today we don't have to really immerse ourselves in true darkness if we don't want to, but in the olden days when the night time came and the shadows crept over us, our imaginations would take charge. And nothing betrays you more in the darkness quite like your imagination. Look. Deep in the shadows. You see it there, don't you? The eyes, hungry and dark. Somehow, they're beautiful, captivating, and you can't look away. A shapeless form, yet a form so familiar. And slowly you push yourself up from the safety of your bed. Something sitting in the corner of the room. Maybe it's just a pile of laundry that's landed a bit weird. You fumble for the light, for your phone, for some safety. Something, anything to cast those shadows away. But the power is off, and you forgot to plug in your phone to charge. And you feel the walls begin to shrink in around you. The door is open. Just a crack. Did you close it? You can't recall. As your eyes adjust to the gloom of the room, a shape begins to form. The shoulders of a man, the stooped curve of the back. Did you hang your dressing gown up there or drop it lazily on the floor? You slowly swing your feet out for the safety of the bed. The floor doesn't usually feel so far away. Did something awful just brush up against your ankle? It has been years since you peeked under your bed. Is there someone down there in the dust and the dark beneath where you sleep? No, that would be ridiculous. You would know, you would know, you would know. And yet, just there, on the edge of your hearing, a sound of something shuffling, shifting, breathing in the night. The room feels strange. No longer your own. Unfamiliar and wrong. And yet exactly the same. You lay flat on your belly and slither like a snake. Grab the edge of the mattress and slowly peer over into that infinite abyss. Slowly he crawls out from beneath the bed. Your eyes and his eyes mere inches apart. Yellow teeth, eyes like death. He's always been there. Always. Night after night while you dozed. But who is he? Who is he? He's...
words are really important, but sometimes a really cheap as shit jump scare just knocks it right out of the park. You all right, Mrs. Deathley? You got frightened. Did you fall over tonight? No, that happened. First night she was late because she was sliding across the floor near the toilet downstairs in distress. Oh, God. Like a little snake.
Sorry about that, everyone. There's a bit of a mean trick to play on you all, but the point, I think, is very well made. Now, you don't really tend to get many ghost stories these days in the daytime. Ghosts are particularly known for being dark and shadowy creatures, which is why it was particularly jarring in the late 90s and early 2000s when suddenly all this Japanese horror, or J-horror, started appearing on our shores. And suddenly we were seeing ghosts with horribly pale and distended faces just in clearly illuminated rooms or wandering around in beautiful lit gardens. The fear of darkness is believed to date back to prehistoric times. You know, it's a sort of conditioning that we've never really been able to shake off. You see, back in the olden days, we would sort of huddle around a small fire at night, and out there in the darkness we could hear the sound of things with much sharper teeth moving around. They hunted and fed on us, and we knew that the dark meant danger. Interestingly, some academic boffins did a study of the things that properly put the shit right up of us. And darkness, I only came in at number 7.
That's right. It's time for the top 10 things that people are freaked out about, as listed by a website we've already forgotten the name of. In at 10, it's thunder and lightning. At 9, it's dogs. Coming in at 8, it's enclosed spaces. At 7, that's right, you know it, it's darkness. At 6, it is snakes. 5, oh my goodness, it's flying. Coming in at 4, it is, oh my god, no, it's spiders. At 3, close your mouths, it's the dentist. 2 is heights, and at 1, it's public speaking.
Glossophobia, as it's called, the fear of public speaking, is apparently the number one thing that causes us to have bouts of anxiety and panic. Mrs. Deathley and I really struggle with glossophobia. I've just realised what we're doing.
Help me. The brain is a weird, smushy thing. There's often no seemingly rational explanation for a fear such as... Oh, I feel like my microphone cut out a little bit then.
It's a ghost.
Chorophobia.
Chorophobia.
Fear of choreographed movement.
Genophobia is the fear of knees. Whoa. How do you feel about this, madam?
Fine.
It's exciting, isn't it? Yeah. Wow.
Scopophobia is a fear of cameras or of having your photograph taken.
I'm stuck.
Snap.
No, I'm not. I'm just 42. That's fine. Oh. Yeah, that brings us on to our next ghostly photo of the night. This is an interesting one. A friend of ours was looking through an old suitcase of photographs, and do you know what? I'm just going to let you have a few moments with it and see if you can spot it.
Listen to the... Oh!
Whoa, that's the quickest it's ever happened.
Sound.
Genuine from the back of the audience. Fuck. Oh, hey!
Hello.
That was a good one. Yeah.
It's just a dog.
Oh my God, I can hear faces melting right now. So this photograph was discovered in a suitcase full of hundreds of photographs. Sadly, her nana passed away, and they had to clear the house out. And being, not greatly unlike ourselves, of an inquisitive mind, she ran some of the photographs taken from the early 1930s through some colorization and enhancing software. And when she did, the colors and the contrast was lifted. Something in the shadows became evident, and there he is. Look at that. Now, the big question is, what is Elijah Wood doing in this photograph? Ooh, it's a brilliant one. This is one that isn't really out there. It's one that we've sort of, one of our friends discovered, and we've sort of been allowed to share it away. There's a few hidden treats in this photograph as well. Firstly, if you look to the, I taped it up and everything, and it's twanged neatly off. If you look here to the left of young, sexy Bill Murray, you'll maybe see something. 1, 2, 3 panes of glass up. Anyone spot her?
The spirit of Christmas past.
The spirit of Christmas past. Well, she had to do something after A Christmas Carol because all the rolls dried up. Apparently not a lot of rolls available when you're an ethereal, glowing ball of light in the shape of a small Victorian child. Nevertheless, weird. And you believe that the fellow on the right looks like...
Johnny Depp, but with 3 ears. And then, of course, the 2 Popeyes.
What's happened to the man in the middle? He's just like... "Ah!" He's really pinching one off. Absolute brilliance. Anyway, let's move on. It's April 1564. Stratford-upon-Avon. And the bard himself is born. It's William Shakespeare. Oh. Most of us are introduced to William Shakespeare in, rather miserable terms. Classrooms, probably aged between 11 to 16 years old. Out come the copies of Romeo and Juliet. And agonizingly, we turn to page 152, and we slowly, it was the of... Anyone having flashbacks yet? And, upon the... And if you're into Shakespeare at an early age, like I genuinely was, you're just going, oh, God! And then you don't look at it again for about 10 years' time. There's a reason people find Shakespeare a little bit maybe inaccessible, a little bit off-putting. It's because they are introduced to it in a rather miserable form, and there's little wonder people are resistant to put a little toe back into the complete works.
I suppose it's like the origin of a fear. If your first experience with something is a bad one, it's going to stick with you for a long time.
Absolutely. I mean, bardophobia is the fear of Shakespeare.
Is it?
No. He was terrified of exhumation, though, which is a strange one, because I would argue the fact that not many of us get to be exhumed while we're alive. I think his imagination ran away with him there. Another thing that William Shakespeare was obsessed with was ghosts.
He wasn't the first playwright to slap a ghost into a story, but his were the ones that stuck.
Mm-hmm. The first time ghosts popped up was Richard III, which does make sense because he wrote that around about the age of 30 years old, which, as we all know, is around the time that the human body begins to turn against itself, and your knees creak, and you get that lower back pain just from being alive. And around about your mid-30s, you accept that we are nothing more than pointless bags of sweaty meat, all clustered together on a miserable treadmill of life, slowly trundling to that open maw of the sweet, infinite darkness and final rest.
Jesus.
Can't wait. So I don't know where I went there. And for the most part, Shakespeare's ghost would appear to people while they were dreaming, or manifestation of guilt, only visible to one person, in Hamlet. Hamlet's dad.
Daddy Ham, as he liked to be called.
Don't clap
Do
that.
it.
He's often seen floating around on the ramparts of the castle. The first time Hamlet was performed at a Shakespearean theatre, the very vocal audience just fell quiet because the utterance of the word ghost was enough to stop their hearts dead. The scene when Daddy Ham appeared on stage was as frightening to them as the most modern cinematic jump scares are to us today.
Outside of the theatre, though, ghosts were believed not to be the spirits of dead, but something more like devils or demons. Spirits would appear to tempt pure souls into evil deeds, to do mischief, blood, and villainy.
There's a brilliant ghost story that appeared around this point in time, and it is called simply The Screaming Queen. It has a connection to York. Catherine Howard was Henry VIII's fifth wife.
Henry had 6 wives over his time, famously creating the phrase, divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived. By the time of his death...
Sorry, I got lost in the musical then.
By the time of his death, Henry...
Or Big Henners, as absolutely no historians have tragically ever called him.
He had a waist measurement of 55 to 58 inches. He was riddled with gout, and it was likely scurvy that offed him in the end.
Now, Catherine married Henry in July 1540, but by November 1541, there were whispers that an affair was occurring, and she was executed on the 13th of February 1542, around 19 or 20 years old. Now, the day she was arrested near Hampton Court, she broke free from her guards, and she ran screaming, shrieking, begging for the king's mercy through what is now suitably known as the Haunted Gallery. To this day, people have seen a pale apparition, an outline of a woman hurtling down the corridor, screaming with such violence that they have left feeling dizzy, nauseous, ringing in their ears. The King's Manor in York, just around the corner from here, it has a slightly less active version of Catherine Howard's ghost. People often hear the sounds of moans and groans coming from the corridors into small rooms that, upon investigation, are completely empty.
Now this is where things get a little bit raunchy. Soft moans, you say?
I do.
Some people say there's a fine line between pleasure and pain. And they also
Sorry, what?
say...
Do they? Do we need to have a conversation after the show tonight and maybe some more wine? Carry on.
Some believe the moans heard in York from the King's Mansion are those of a moment in time between Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpeper. Mm-hmm. The moans of ecstasy, perhaps, because they were accused of having a raunchy affair.
You're really dancing around this very delicately. Friends, they were absolutely shagging. Yeah. All over the King's Manor, up against the walls. She was like, ooh, Culpeper me. Ooh, use both hands.
As I was saying, Culpeper also haunts Hampton Court, but there he's just seen looking at paintings with a snooty look of distaste on his face before just brazenly walking off through a wall.
Rude. Now, some people also believe it's around this point in time when we really nailed the artistry of a good ghost story. But this is quite a thick and syrupy section of the show, ultimately leading into the horrific topic we will be talking about at the end of the night. So I think it's about time that we took a little bit of a breather. Friends, it's an interval of sorts. Recharge your drinks, stretch your legs, go for that poo you've been holding in for a good half an hour. Let us know how it goes. We'll be wandering around, milling around. If you fancy a chat, ask us any questions about things we've tackled in the first half. Other than that, in about 15 minutes or so, we'll be back and we will resume our night of face-melting horror. Thank you.
So apparently you only get lead poisoning if you ingest it.
You only get lead poisoning if you ingest it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. That's good. You learn something new every day, don't you? You only get lead poisoning. So Mrs. Deathley was gifted a lovely piece of work, and what is it? It's a window hanger, isn't it? Sort of hangs in the window.
Beautiful ghost.
Beautiful ghost, and it sort of hangs in the window and catches the sunlight. But she thought it was quite lovely and started wearing it like a little necklace, and was informed today, it's got a bit of lead in it. How are you feeling?
I feel fine.
Yeah. This is a strong music choice here, Jared. Panic all, panic all. Press the button that says panic all. You're welcome.
Jared, are you okay?
Sound technician right here. You all right?
Thumbs
Can we have a little round of applause for Jared, by the way? He's on his own up there.
Look at him in his
And
little...
he wasn't available for any of the rehearsals that we did. He genuinely came in and he sort of met this show about a week ago and had to familiarise himself with all of this. And he's doing a bloody good job. He's only 5 years old. He's brilliant. Put him to work. Actually, every now and again I look up, and because of his light, it gets him from underneath. He looks a little bit like a manic chipmunk. Just look at him there. Show us the teeth, Jared. Look at that.
Beautiful boy.
He's a ghost.
Beautiful boy.
So no rush. You get your drinks. Welcome to the north of England. This is how we survive, I understand. Only thing that dulls the pain. Shall we begin the second half of it all?
We're going back in.
Do it.
Crime. Does it pay? Well, yes, especially if your victims aren't the sharpest knives in the cutlery drawer.
It's the Georgian era. It's around 1714 to the 1830s, and humans are starting to cotton on to the fact that even though ghosts are almost certainly real, that strange creaking sound from the top of the house might just be the building settling at the end of a long, hot day.
And the awful shriek "Wow!" from the alley is just a pair of horny cats properly going at it.
But imagination runs wild, and some naughty ne'er-do-wells soon cottoned on that imagination or fear could be exploited for financial gain. It's winter, 1815. And people are talking about a ghost, about a pale phantom that has been seen moving around in a graveyard of Holborn, London. And they start to gather at the graveyard, at the wrought metal fence. Night after night, the numbers increase. First 5, then 10, then 20, then 30, 40. Near 100 people ultimately gather outside of this little old graveyard, desperate to catch a sight of a ghost. Now, one night, out of nowhere, the ghost appears right before their eyes, a clothed phantom rising high above them. It drifts its way from graveyard to graveyard. Around it goes, ooh, ooh, ooh. And as it goes, it makes this noise, this awful, agonized sound. And then it clambers high above their heads, a terrifying apparition high upon a crypt, and it points down at them with an accusing finger and goes, "Aah!" At which point it's tackled to the ground by 3 police officers.
It's James Canis. Careful how you pronounce that one. Dressed all in white with his face painted the same, he claims that to patrol the graveyard, to investigate the older and more rare sightings, when he discovered it wasn't much more than a patch of moonlight striking a pale tombstone. He decided to dress up as a ghost for a laugh. I would.
I have.
Some believed that Canis was in the middle of creating the world's first scare attraction and was on the verge of profiting, perhaps by getting involved with some street vendors selling food and drink, or perhaps those little headbands with ghosts on springs. Ding, ding. I don't know why they'd do that, but such a thing was impossible to prove.
In 1737, a man by the name of Georgie Watt went to his minister and told him that he believed with all of his heart that his house was haunted. Night after night, he said, I've been chased through the corridors and the passageways by a phantom, a miserable white apparition of my mother. And she screams and shrieks at me, telling me, it is the will of the great God, boy, that you should marry the serving girl, Tibby Mortimer. He closes himself away inside of his bedroom, and the phantom starts hammering mercilessly on the doors. The minister is like, damn, come and check it out. And they go to the house together. The door opens, and standing there at the end of the corridor is the ghost. And it quickly turns away and runs off. And the minister, being a holy man of the Lord, gives chase and, I must read this properly because it's a fantastic quote, catches it, tackles the ghost to the ground, and makes such a trial of the apparition as he thought agreeable to the principles of Christian revelation and the one true philosophy. Which is a really long way of saying he battered the absolute shit out of the ghost with a massive stick he'd found in the garden. Pulling back the sheet, who does he find? Tibby Mortimer. She's pregnant with Georgie Watt's child, and he tried to skip responsibility, and both of them were charged with the quite frankly wonderful crime of fornication.
Finally, it's time for the ghost story with the greatest title of all time.
No,
You're
we
welcome.
said we weren't going to do
I'm
this
gonna
one.
do it.
No, it's
I'm
despicable.
gonna do it. Scratching Fanny at Cock Lane. 1759. A landlord, Richard Parsons, rent a room in his house to the widower, Richard Dick Kent.
And what a Kent he turned out to be.
Now, Dick Kent was accompanied by Fanny Lines, his dead wife's sister and now mistress. Dick borrowed money from his landlord and he couldn't pay it back, so they fell out violently. Dick and Fanny moved out of the house, and sadly, Fanny was covered in smallpox, and by the end of the year, she was dead. I'm glad you didn't laugh at that.
Yeah, last night people were like, ha!
Harsh. By 1762, the landlord and his daughter started to report that their Cock Lane house was haunted. It was haunted by Fanny.
This is some highbrow stuff right here. It's really up there.
But wait, there's more. The ghost became known as Scratching Fanny, because it often sounded like she was clawing at the furniture. They said that Kent had poisoned her with arsenic, which we know wasn't true. It was smallpox. And it was a scandal.
I really wish I found out that the curtain made this sound before the final night of the show.
Newspapers across the country started running the story, and before long crowds were gathering at the house of Scratching Fanny, all crammed into Cock Lane. Seances were held.
Scratch, Fanny, if you can hear us. Fanny, are you there?
Eventually it was uncovered the whole thing was a hoax, that the landlord was so angry with Dick and Fanny that he forced his daughter to be a fake Scratching Fanny and the Cock Lane Fanny Scratcher.
All right. You've definitely rubbed more than enough dirt on this Fanny. Let's move on. The year is 1837, June 20th, a Tuesday. It genuinely was. And the Victorian era has landed. Stop it. And those. This is it. It's the moment in human history that we stand up as one and agree that ghost stories are absolutely flipping brilliant.
Ghost stories, spirit photography, drawing room seances.
Ghost stories were cheap and publishers liked them. They followed a nice framework, easily written, could be adapted, cut down, edited, bunged into anthologies. They were basically the soap opera of the Victorian times.
There was also a huge surge in ghost sightings around this time. Some people believed it was the increased conversation about the spooky boys that had aroused them, as if by acknowledging them openly and frequently, we'd given them power, and people were seeing ghosts everywhere.
It was definitely nothing to do with the fact that the Victorian people were illuminating their houses with gas lamps, and the ensuing carbon monoxide fumes were making us high as decay absolutely tripping balls and seeing things. Oh, Jesus Christ. Also, there was a redistribution of wealth around about these times, and people started moving from their little townhouses out into the countryside. They'd often buy manor houses and estates, and they didn't know that these houses often came pre-equipped with a serving staff. They were really confused as to why the fires were always lit, why the beds were always made, why there was always a really nice warm pot of tea in the dining room. Now they would often see strange figures moving along at the end of corridors, and they go running down towards dead ends and find nobody there. Servants were supposed to be seen but not heard, and preferably not even seen. And they would often have hidden doorways leading into servants' corridors and quarters. The people who bought the houses would slap them back at the markets, move back into the city and be like, "Don't go out there to Green Rolling Hills, mate. It's full of ghosts. All these bloody dead things walking around the place."
But the imagination was there, even if there was often a solid scientific explanation.
Yeah, but with the explanation, scientific fact came profit. Mediums and spiritualists started popping up on every street corner. Here in the city of York, there was a massive industry for it. They would come and, for a fee, cleanse your house, communicate with the ghost that haunted it. They would go all out, little tiny tablecloths, wonderful costumes, burning the sage, proper theatre. As the money rolled in, the production values would rise. They invested in magnets, pulleys, electrical tricks. There's a brilliant story of a time in the 1800s when a group of men and women were arrested for breaking the peace. They had called forth a medium, a spiritualist, to their house because they genuinely believed they were being plagued by a ghost. And the seance went on, and there was the burning of the candles and the whiffing of the stuff. And suddenly before their eyes, there raised up through the middle of the tablecloth, and it clambered up higher, higher above their heads, a wasted apparition, dreadful and naught, staring down, and one of the men panicked and bang! Uppercutted it right in the snout. At which point the ghost launched back at it. "Oh, you bastard!" And they rolled out into the street, arms flailing. In the end, it turned out to be the son of the medium, who had been hiding squatted underneath the table, and at the moment called right for the cue, he just simply stood up through a hole that was cut in the middle of it to give the illusion of a ghost.
The Victorians were a fairly weird lot. It was as if for the first time people were living not just to stay alive, but had time on their hands and they didn't know what to do with it. Ghost stories, seances and such, they were a good way to pass the time, but not the strangest thing they'd do by miles. The upper classes used to host mummy unwrapping parties.
This is a thing that genuinely happened. Go on the hollybobs, have a little bit of an excursion, get lost in the history of Egypt, and what do we love bringing home after a little bit of a holiday? A brilliant little souvenir. Why not bring home a keychain or 1,000 cigarettes in a mysteriously hidden box? Why not bring home a desiccated human corpse for you and your friends and family to unwrap on the dining table?
Like a messed up pass the parcel.
Yeah.
With chopsticks.
Why does that man have chopsticks? In case he gets hungry in the middle, let's have a little go. Why not?
Look at them all having a good old-fashioned family fun time.
Now, authors, they saw the rise in the demand in ghost stories, and they absolutely leapt on it. You, of course, all know the name Charles Dickens, but what about Elizabeth Gaskell, Edgar Allan Poe, M.R. James, Henry James, Catherine Crowe, to name a few? Now, Dickens is an interesting one. Normally around Christmas time, I'll slightly shift gears on the ghost tours and drop in a few ghost stories. And when I mention Charles Dickens as an author of ghost stories, a lot of people go, "What? Christmas Carol? That's not frightening." If you look at the original text, A Christmas Carol is a straight-up ghost story.
And the most famous adaptation of that ghost story. And there's no way you could go back and tell Charles Dickens that this is what was going to happen. Is this A Muppet Christmas Carol?
Man, I'd love to go back in time with this image and go, Charles, that's you! And just watch his eyes glaze over. Back in the day, Dickens would perform the text to frightened audiences gathered around those lovely carbon monoxide lamps. I suppose it's all about the delivery.
Marley was dead. To begin with, there was no doubt whatever about that. Indeed.
Marley was dead. To begin with. Do you know this, Jared, next cue, please. At this point, I'm supposed to do a really frightening version of the opening line, but I think we can all agree that that was the most disturbing thing we've ever seen. Look at it. Look at it. Just, why is it so flat? Where's its lower jaw gone? Oh, Christ. I'm pretty sure that was in our bedroom last night. Something else happened in the Victorian times. Suddenly, we were having to deal with this. Super creepy Victorian ghost children.
There they are, proper little bastards.
Why was there a sudden explosion of ghosts of this manner back in the Victorian times? Was it because of the fact that we had a strange habit of dressing small children up as weird-looking old men and then asking them to pose awkwardly for photographs just like this to frighten future generations? Was it the fact that we were often shoving them up chimneys or into poor workhouses, into the industrial ragged schools where they would leave long but tragic lives, sometimes short and tragic lives, truth be told?
One of the most famous ghost stories that York has to offer is that of the children of the Bedern Ragged School.
It's an interesting one, this. George Pym, the headmaster of the Industrial Ragged School, moving from bed to bed, slitting the throats of all the children in his charge. George Pym rounding up all the waifs and orphans and putting them to work, hard physical labour. George Pym, ultimately driven to madness, hanging himself from the rafters of an insane asylum cell. And as he slips over into the great beyond, he is mocked by the sound of the laughter of the children whose lives he cut so tragically short.
There are a dozen ghost tours in York. Almost all of them share the story of George Pym.
Us included.
But is it anything other than a story?
Oh, absolutely. Probably not. There are records of the industrial ragged schools, but they were originally on College Street and later Marygate. There is possibly a small school that used to sit on Bedern, but there is no solid evidence of something called the Bedern Ragged School. The schools themselves were owned by a number of people over the years, but there is no mention in history, fact, of George Pym.
By October 1920, the school was still in operation but closed rather suddenly. Like many good spooky buildings in York, it is now flats.
But if you trace the building through history, through the dry, dusty books that are fact, you will find not a single mention of George Pym. But if you Google the name George Pym, along with Bedern or York, you will find dozens of mentions of him on the supernatural and paranormal databases. I have an idea that George Pym was a figment of Victorian folklore. He was a name that parents would use to keep their children in line. Go to bed! Go to bed, or I'll send you to George Pym's school for naughty boys and girls, and if you behave as you behave tonight, he will slit your throat from cheek to cheek. Parents, try that one tonight. Let us know how it goes for you.
Back in the 1800s, spirit photography became popular with those with money to burn.
Come along and pose for a family photo. Look a bit confused and forlorn about why you're here. Maybe you'll get lucky and capture an image on the glass plate of a long-dead family member.
So one of the photographers who pioneered the industry was William H. Mumler, who claimed to have discovered his technique for capturing the dead on film by accident.
Word spread about this man who had a lens that could transition between life and death. And then a ghost.
Violence is not the answer.
1862, James Wallace Black, a photographer who was the man who took the very first aerial photograph of London, he booked a session with Mumler and made his intentions known. Mr. Mumler, who said, I wish to understand the science and technology behind what you are doing. Without fail, he said, you seem to capture the dead in your photographs. To which Mumler replied, I don't do anything. The spirits do it. Now, every step of the way, Black was allowed access to the technology, to the lens, the camera body, the black fabric, the glass plate, even offering Black the opportunity to develop the photograph himself, to which Black replied, no, I think I will not. I am not familiar with your chemical process. And then sort of thinking he'd given away too much, he sort of patronizingly said, besides, you are not intelligent enough to slip anything onto that plate without my knowing it. The two men stood together in this tiny little dark room. And this man, who knew absolutely everything about the process and photography, watched as the photograph slowly developed. First of all, there he was, sitting in his seat, looking a bit sad and tragic. And a few moments later, a second shape formed, just standing on his shoulder. And that shape was a picture-perfect representation of his father, who had died when he was 13 years old. And suddenly, the very talkative and rather patronizing Black was very, very quiet. Do you mind if I take this photograph with me? Absolutely not, said Mumler. £2.
One of the most famous photographs captured using the Mumler process was this one. 1872, Mary Todd Lincoln, the grieving widow of hat enthusiast and former American President Abraham Lincoln, visited Mumler using an alias. The photograph was taken and the scandal began. Mumler was accused of fraud, in particular by P.T. Barnum, the greatest showman himself, who accused Mumler of exploiting people who were grieving, and the whole thing moved to trial, but they couldn't provide any solid proof.
There were accusations that Mumler was up to something. Many reported that even though the studio was fairly busy, he would give indications that it was far busier than it was. "Oh, I'm very, very booked up," he would say, "and I can't possibly see you for another 3 months." And between those 3 months, a criminal friend of his would sneak into the house, steal a photograph from a family album, and they would utilize it to... Well, we actually have a small opportunity here, friends. I have upon my person a slightly old-fashioned version of cameras that we enjoy today, the Polaroid camera. This is the Polaroid One Step. It's a slightly updated and more reliable version of the land camera and etc. that existed in the olden days. And we do have an opportunity here to take a spirit photography session of ourselves. I'm just curious, anyone interested in being a subject? Show me those hands. First. Nailed it. Nailed it. Right. Round of applause for the man who's about to partake. Simply, so what's your name? Carl, take a seat. He's nailed it. That was actually my next line of the script. Look sad and tragic. This beautiful man here. Okay. You've done this face before, Carl. Resume, stop smiling. Tragic, and bam. You're sitting here, Carl, is that correct? I'm going to, so here we are, there's a photograph. I'm just going to pop it there on top of Sophie Buckley's face. Round of applause for Carl, please. That's right. So don't touch the photograph for no other reason that you may have heard that with the spit you take the photo and anyone know about this? Yeah. Lies! That will knacker the image. When you take a Polaroid photograph, put it somewhere dark, a pocket or a small case, down on the surface. Allow it dark room. Not wiggle it around like an idiot room. Dark room. Maybe Carl will share that image with a few people at the end of the night if you're happy to do so. Maybe we'll capture something, maybe we won't. We haven't yet. We've tried every night. Maybe tonight's the night. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I feel good about this.
So we leave the Victorian times behind us, and here we are. It's the 20th century. A time of growth, knowledge, technology, like smoke machines and theatre lights and microphones. And we use all of this for the hunting, the storytelling, the theatricality of the ghosts. And over the 100 years that have just passed, we have had some of the most incredible examples of hauntings ever captured. A need to debunk, to scientifically explain, to categorize, to seek rationality. Phrases began to appear that we hadn't really heard before. Shades, echoes, doppelganger, poltergeist. These are words that existed for a very long time in German folklore, and suddenly they were right up at the forefront of imagination. Poltergeist is a brilliant word. Poltergeist comes from the German poltern, which is to make noise or to rumble. Geist, of course, is ghost or spirit or spook. Poltergeist, noisy ghost. Brilliant.
Or rumble spook, as I prefer.
That's better. That's better. Now, that final word, poltergeist, is the one that has been the strongest, most reoccurring voice in front of many hauntings over the last century.
So before we dive into our final segment of the show...
Actually, sorry for cutting you off there, Mrs. Deftly. I've just, all night, I've been fighting an urge. It's our last show. This is our last show. It's been a long road to get here. Obviously, we were supposed to stage this originally in October. Then I died for several months and then came back. It was a whole thing. But here we are, and it's been brilliant. We've had big packed houses. It's been a wonderful time. And there's something I need to tell you about. Something that happened.
Why am I nervous?
You should be nervous. Jared, would you...
Some beers, just enough beers that we stopped to eat some meat. Remember?
Oh, yeah, mystery meat from that man called Stan.
When from this house, which was quiet as a mouse, came a call, a cry, a scream, a scream, a scream of pure despair.
Proper gut-wrenching stuff.
So, me being me, I wobbled to the floor and I knocked a 2, 3, 4 off the hinges that swung wide and I wandered deep inside.
Deep inside the house.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. Oh, the shadows pitch black dark, light no flicker, not a spark. With the flicker of my hair, there was something on the stairs. And friends, it was the night. The night I shit my pants.
It was what? Wait, what? You did what?
Oh, that sharp infernal screaming told me that I wasn't dreaming. My eyes widened, disbelieving, as the shadows began to grow.
I'm sorry, can we just go back to the part about you shitting yourself again?
And I span to face the floor, tripped and fell upon the floor, did not want to see no more, and I cried, "Oh no, please no!"
I'm speechless.
And the phantom seemed to grow, spectral hair began to flow, crooked jaw was awfully low, and I felt time begin to slow.
You wouldn't look me in the eyes all the way home that night.
There was a gurgle of my guts and a tingle of the nuts. With a spluttery splut, the back door was no longer shut. It was the night, my friends. It was the night, look me in the eyes. The night I shit my pants.
This is such a weird
No
way to
emotion
tell me about
at
this
all.
for
Absolutely
the first
brilliant.
time.
The ghostie seemed to pause, taking in the scene it saw as I rolled around the floor, quite clearly not okay.
You told me you didn't know where they came from, those crusty pants.
The ghost awkwardly cleared his throat. Sorry, mate, it said, I quote, as the way it began to float, I didn't mean for this to be. So I left the house just as bashful as a mouse and as tragic as a louse. It was the night, my friends. The night.
We called the police and everything.
Did you?
Yeah. And they took them away in a little bag as evidence. There was a case number and everything.
That really got out of hand. It was a night I shit my such a long brown night. The night I shit my I, madam, hadn't told my wife about the night I shit my pants. It was the night I shit my pants. Thank you.
Do you feel better for sharing?
I feel so much lighter. Like a weight has been lifted or dropped. Take your pick. Take your pick. Wonderful. So.
Wow.
I
So
think
before before we land in the 20th century, by which I mean the 1950s and beyond.
3 of the most famous hauntings of the Victorian era happened over this period of time. 1956 saw the start of the Battersea Poltergeist incidents. 1966, the haunting of 30 East Drive. And in 1977, the Enfield Poltergeist. We could run an entire show on each individual haunting. And chances are, we may well do in the future. But for now, the Battersea Poltergeist has been covered so brilliantly by Danny Robbins. Anyone? Yes, the Battersea Poltergeist and the incredible podcast that you should definitely listen to. And of course, the theatre show of the same name. 30 East Drive of Pontefract, the Black Monk of Pontefract, has been covered by us on our own podcast quite violently and enthusiastically. Again, shameless plug. So tonight, we are going to talk about Enfield. Now, East Drive is an interesting one because we had the opportunity, and I say luck very loosely here, to visit the house back in December 2021.
Now, all 3 of the aforementioned incidents share a lot in common. They all took place in a seemingly normal house, which you wouldn't walk by without a second glance. All 3 featured heavily documented poltergeist activity, and at the centre of all the stories was a young girl.
In Battersea, it was Shirley Hitchens. There she is. She was about 15 years old when strange things started to happen. She would hear the sound of coming from under the floorboards. Keys would appear, keys that opened no doors inside of the property on her pillow. There was banging and locking so loud in the property that the neighbours would often come rushing to the house thinking it was caving in, dropping into the street itself.
At East Drive, it was the Pritchard family, particularly Diane, who was 12 years old. We haven't got a picture of Diane because after the incident, she didn't speak much about it, but we have got a picture of her mum, Jean, who lived in the house for years until she retired to a nursing home.
Now, that book there is Poltergeist by Colin Wilson. You can probably pick it up on eBay for about £3 or £4, and it's a fascinating read. The house stood empty for quite a long time, ultimately becoming a bit of a hotspot for paranormal investigators. Now, in the 1960s, Jean said there was an incident when she was pulled up the staircase, dragged by her hair. And then later that week, her grandfather clock that stood at the top of the staircase was shoved down towards. I could talk about it all night long. We have had the opportunity, let's say that, to visit the house. And it was on the staircase that Jean said she was dragged up that I believe that I had my first, age 41 years old, supernatural encounter. At the bottom of the stairs was a hat on a coat rack. We hadn't really noticed this hat as the night went on. No one had touched it, no one had looked at it. But as the equipment was being packed away, annoyingly after the live streams that we'd ran, I clocked that hat. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I put that hat on. And Mrs. Deathley took that photograph using that camera right there. And as the light of the flash faded, I saw something. At the top of the stairs, I saw a hand. This black gloved hand, the fingers impossibly long. And before my eyes, it just slowly lifted up, not across the banister, but straight up into the void above the staircase. I've never felt anything like it. Genuinely, this pit formed in my stomach. I suddenly felt nauseous, a little bit dizzy, ringing in my ears.
And at this point, any normal person would leave, run away, go home. But guess what this guy did?
I went up the stairs and was like, hello, you refused to come with me.
Absolutely.
I could hear you both downstairs moving things around. And even though I could hear you, I suddenly knew I was alone in the house. You know when you're alone at home, and it's a weird, isn't it? A house feels a bit different. Like when you're at home on your own for a few hours and it's dark and quiet and just homes take on a different form. That's how the house felt. And suddenly my hands and feet got very cold, but also very sweated at the same time. And I knew that I had to leave. I've been asked for 40 years of my life, 12 of which I've spent telling ghost stories and been absolutely consumed by the paranormal and the supernatural. I've been asked, have you ever seen a ghost? And until that very day, I would reply, just like Irving Finkel, I've never seen a ghost. I would like to. It's very upsetting to me. My advice to you is be careful what you wish for, because now the bastards are everywhere. I've seen 3 over the last few years. The hand, one evening in our new home. I was talking to Mrs. Deathley, who was in the office. And then from the kitchen, you said, what are you saying? And when I looked back, she was no longer there. A doppelganger turned out to be an omen of good looks, rather fortunately. A few weeks after that, there was a weird man in bifocal glasses staring down at me into the backyard of our house from the window. My eyes locked his eyes locked mine. My breath fell short. It was my dad in the end. He was messing around trying to bleed a radiator we'd complained about. But at that moment, just the top of his head was visible. Properly shit your pants. Do you have any Allen keys? Of course I've got Allen keys. I'm 42. I've got 5,000 of the things.
But you digress.
I do digress. At some point I digress.
Right now we're going to talk about the haunting of 284 Green Street, Enfield, London.
Which apparently is where Jesus lives.
Ominous. August 1977, and Peggy Hodgson calls the police to the house where she lives with her 4 children, including Margaret, 13, and Janet, 11. She complains of a loud, repetitive banging coming from the walls. At first, she thought maybe the neighbours were doing something weird, but then realised it was coming from inside her own house. The banging wasn't dull or muffled, as if it was coming from next door.
A police officer arrived at the house, very serious, no-nonsense man of the 1970s, and he saw with his own eyes a wooden chair move across the floor. Not just a little nudge, but a full 4 or 5 feet. It was almost as if what was in that house didn't appreciate being talked about so openly, being told on, I suppose. And from that point, the house just became angrier. The girls, Margaret and Janet, would report being woken up in the middle of the night. Sometimes something would grab at their ankles and their feet. Covers would be slowly dragged away. On one occasion, a chest of drawers was hurled halfway across the room and stopped suddenly and then slammed back against the wall. At this point, Peggy came running into the room. Panicked, she ran out into the street, started screaming for help. Her neighbours came pouring into the house. Police were called. 15 or 20 people were moving around the property, and they could all hear the sound. It was all documented. The sound of banging coming from out of the walls, thumping coming from under the floors, even whispers coming out from the drains. And every time someone closed in, it hit, it would move across to the other side of the street. Nobody could find the source of the sounds.
So what makes this story stand out above the others? Well, the Enfield haunting has become one of the most famous in England. Several books written about it. It was made into a TV series. It was even the basis for the film The Conjuring 2. It's possibly because many of the strange goings-on were captured on film, including this photograph. This image apparently shows Janet, the younger daughter, performing what 2 investigators called an impossible leap, with Janet claiming she was on her bed and then violently thrown up into the air. Maurice Grosse and Guy Playfair, investigators for the Society of Psychical Research, were adamant that the haunting was genuine. They captured many of the images themselves.
And Grosse and Playfair were very scientifically minded men, and they would famously debunk about 75 to 80% of the ghostly encounters that they investigated. Many occasions, their technology, the science that they used, cameras, the temperature guns, etc., tape recorders, they would work fine before they entered the house, but within 15 minutes of being in this property, they would strangely malfunction. They revealed that they believed that some elements of the haunting were being faked by the children. Only a small percentage, like things like spoons that were being bent and tape recorders hidden inside of walls. They believed that they were doing this simply because they felt like if they allowed everyone to enter the house to experience some kind of paranormal situation themselves, that perhaps they would help, they would assist, they would help the nightmare finally come to an end.
And at the heart of all of the 3 stories were 2 personalities. The ghost, who was an older man, and the young girl. In Battersea, there was Donald and Shirley. At East Drive, it was Fred and Diane. And at Enfield, it was Bill, as they come to call him, and Janet.
There's a strange phenomena at play here, which is very consistent throughout most ghost stories and hauntings throughout the world. People will first begin to refer to whatever is happening as the thing, this weird thing, and then maybe they'll start using the word ghost or entity. But people will often assign a nickname, a humanizing name, like Bill or Joe or Ted or Philip, something short and brief that removes a fear, lessens the horror. The media started talking about it in a bit of an amused fashion, the haunted ghost of Green Street, but then they started turning slightly more spiteful, accusing the children of making things up.
But despite this, Grosse was convinced, and he logged over 2,000 individual events at the house. Chairs sliding across the room, toys being thrown up in the air, pools of water, which were a poltergeist's favourite, you probably know this, would form on the floor, rising up when there were no pipes, damp or condensation. And when things became too intense, the children would go and stay with a family who lived down the street.
In 1977 was a particularly upsetting event. Bill, as he became known, was angry and restless. He was storming around the house, kicking and slamming furniture around, smashing doors together. And later that night, he actually flipped the bed over that Janet was sleeping in, completely hurling it across the room. And it was enough. At this point, Peggy took a small pad of paper. She placed it on the dining room table with a pencil on top of it and asked Bill to let her know why he was doing what he was doing. Why are you terrorizing my family this way? The next morning, she found the paper on the floor of the kitchen all scrumpled up, the pencil broke in half, and a message waiting for her read, "I will not leave my house. Do not tell anyone about this message. or I will retaliate. Peggy was forced to give her children and herself sleeping tablets just to get through the night. They'd often sleep in the corner of the rooms underneath tables because the beds were now flipping over on a near nightly basis.
Christmas that year. Janet's begun to act odd. She's quiet, quick to anger and upset. She starts to draw violent images, leaving them scattered around the house. Peggy and Gross hear her talking in a low voice, making strange guttural noises. What we're about to listen to is the actual recording made by Maurice Gross as he attempted to communicate with Bill.
We're not going to play the whole thing. It's about 25 minutes long, various recordings taken over various weeks. This is a small excerpt that we find particularly interesting, but one thing I need to make clear is that when the recording was taken, there were 7 people around the room when it happened. All of them confirmed that the second voice that you're going to hear came out of Janet's mouth. She's an 11-year-old girl. Jared?
I want you to tell me whether you remember what happened to you when you died. Just before you died and just after you died.
Days before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
Sleep tight. So if you didn't catch that, the voice says, the night before I died, I went blind. I had a hemorrhage. And I died in a chair in a corner downstairs. Now, news of the house swept the world. Paranormal investigators descended upon the house, including the rock stars of the paranormal psychological world, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were made famous by these beautiful people. Look at them. Yeah, look at those cheekbones. In reality, Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were lovely people, but they were not quite as glamorous. Yeah, that woman on the left, she's got a secret. That man on the right, absolutely holding in a really painful fart. Now, they captured over the years thousands of hours of events, and they declared without a doubt that this strange little innocent house was absolutely haunted.
And then as suddenly as the haunting started, it stopped. In 1979, one day, everything just went away, and along with it, all of the media interest. The Hodgson family did their best to resume a normal life. Janet and Margaret would agree to interviews now and again, and their belief that it all happened never faded. I know what we saw, and what we saw was real. They did admit to amplifying certain things and faking some, around 2%, they said, and everything else was Bill or Joe, the entities. Many are adamant that the whole thing was a hoax, and that they were just replicating what they'd heard about Battersea and East Drive for a bit of excitement and fame.
That's a tricky one. You see, Harry Martindale, the Roman fella, he didn't make a single penny from what he'd encountered. He just needed to be heard, whereas the Hodgsons have profited from the whole thing. But I suppose you need to ask yourself, where's the harm in pocketing a little profit from a good ghost story or two? That brings us, friends, to the end of our time together.
Thousands of years smushed into a couple of tiny hours.
Before we go, though, can we just ask one big question? Lights, please, Jared.
Find your favourite hand and rise it up into the air.
Ooh. Leave your hand up if you think you have seen a ghost.
Oh.
And finally, leave your hand up if you know you have seen a ghost. Beautiful. Ooh. Maybe we've wavered a few minds tonight. Maybe we've rocked a cynic or made a lifelong believer question themselves. One thing is for sure, there is nothing quite as entertaining as a good ghost story.
And ghosts really do love to perform.
All the dead things truth truth brings. I've had one life, that life over. Always I know you'd be at my show, watching, waiting, commiserating, saying so. I will not go. Turn the lights off. I'm following you home. I'm gonna follow you home. I'll fucking follow you home. Late night, come home, work sucked, I know. I'm hiding underneath your stairs. You do not even know that I'm there. Say it ain't so. I will not go. Turn the lights off. I'll follow you home. I'm gonna follow you home. Look at my feet, my weird ghost feet. I'm definitely not Mrs. Deathly in a sheet. All the dead things, truth care, truth brings. Can I just point out, you all bought tickets for this? Always, I know you'd be at this show, watching, waiting, commiserating. Say it ain't so. I will not go. Phone the lights off. I'll follow you home. Robert Coote. I'll follow you home. Janie Faith McLean. I'll follow you home. The super intense man at the front right on the balcony. I'll follow you home. We locked eyes so many times tonight, and I'll follow you home. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mrs. Didi Deathly! Oh, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a long, weird road to get here. Of course, the show was originally supposed to happen over the week of Halloween, which is a complete no-brainer. Night of Ghost Stories. Then I died, and I literally couldn't speak for 8 weeks of my life. It was so bizarre, but it's been bloody brilliant to end the show on such a wonderful, fantastic, receptive audience. I do hope you've enjoyed yourself tonight. If you want more of this in your life, join us on the Facebooks. I know, but we've made good use of it. Over the years, we've done live tours, paranormal investigations, our podcast, all entirely free to consume. We're hoping to be back here around Halloween 2024. But that's not confirmed yet, with a brand new show that I'm not going to. I'm doing it again. I'm giving too much away.
He has
Stop
these ideas
me!
and then he
I just have ideas on stage. What I'm going to do, right, is I'm going to buy a massive mechanical dinosaur, and I'm going to and she's just there going, "Oh God, it's happened again." Anything else to add?
Thank you to Jared. Jazza up in the tech box there.
The
and
chipmunk of
to
technology.
all the wonderful volunteers at Theatre 41 who have helped us out this week.
Don't forget to take the little brochures home with you. They are full to the brim with incredible shows happening over this season. It's an amazing venue and really does appreciate your support. Other than that, I think we're done. It's over. Stay safe, friends. Stay spooky. And good night.